Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all of our Native Food Sovereignty Fellows to today's training webinar, which is the second part of a two-part series that we're doing on how to conduct a food sovereignty assessment. We've got two presenters with us today, Erin Sherrill, who is the Research Director at the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, and Vicki Karhu, who was our presenter on the first part of this series. And we very much appreciate that she's able to join us again today to finish us up with this second part. So with that, Erin, you want to go ahead and take the floor, and we'll get started with our presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everybody. As Brian said, my name is Erin Sherrill, and I'm the Research Director here at the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative. I'm glad you could join us again this afternoon for another look at how we do food sovereignty assessments in communities across Indian country. Vicki Karhu is going to walk you through part two, which is sort of the deeper dive section of this community food sovereignty assessment process. I hope you learned a lot last time and you've made some progress on this since we spoke with you last. With that, I'm just going to let Vicki take it away. I think, Vicki, if you're ready.
Okay, I'm ready to roll.
Right.
Let's see if I have control of the the PowerPoint. And I'd just like to say hello, good afternoon to everyone across Indian country, wherever you may be. I want to thank the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative for including food sovereignty in your VISTA experience. So my name is Vicki Karhu. I'm an independent consultant. I work all across Indian country, have been for a long time, like decades. And what I'm sharing with you today is from the experience that I've gleaned from working with both tribes, tribal governments, and also nonprofit organizations in tribal communities who are looking at the questions of food sovereignty, how to discover some solutions to the situation, and design programs around these solutions. So if we could go ahead and get the next slide up. It's not working for me, Brian, so I guess you need to advance the slides. So, as Brian mentioned a minute ago, this is the second webinar in a series. The PDF from the first webinar is available, and that's where it'll really take it step by step up to this point. So some of what I say today may not make complete sense if you missed the first one, but this one too is available as a handout, as a PDF, and I would strongly encourage you to go back, look at the first one, go through it and try to digest a lot of that, because there's a lot of information in these two PowerPoints. This is really a 2-day workshop that's condensed down into less than 2 hours. So go back, look at that first one, see if you can, really digest it and think about how you can apply some of the ideas, then go into this one. But we're going to go into this one today as if you're already familiar with the first one. And just as a brief review of some of what we've already talked about, we talked about outreach, and we talked about you getting a core group of people together. So, and that's what we call a food sovereignty team. So you and your team, you've been talking about food sovereignty amongst yourself. You've done some outreach. You've gotten the feeling of how people are reacting to the food system or interacting with the food system in your community, whether it's a tribal nonprofit working within a community setting, or it's a tribal government or tribal program working under the tribe. You've taken these first steps to get a grip on what do we mean by food sovereignty and how it's affecting you. So now you're ready to work directly with your tribal or community members to explore your food system and food sovereignty. In other words, to really take a good look, and we're going to use a food assessment as the way to take this good look. So your goal in working with the community is to gather honest information that will help you understand the food issues, diet-related health problems that we all know are out there, a lot of them, obstacles to food sovereignty. You've been talking about what is food sovereignty, so what's holding you back, and possible solutions to the situation, among other things. So you're reaching out to the people that you serve, and you're doing this to help you, your organization, or your tribe to shape the best programs and or policies to recover and promote your tribe's or your community's food sovereignty. Everything that we talk about can be used in either a tribal setting, as far as under a tribal program, or in the community at large. So next slide, please. Okay, so now we're following up on the work that was described in the earlier webinar. So these are the things that you would have accomplished by now had you followed all those steps. Your food sovereignty team is formed and it's been meeting regularly. Everybody has a good idea what does food sovereignty mean in your particular situation and location. You've also, and this is important, define the community that you're going to survey. And we went into that last time, but you don't just go out and try to find, work with an entire, say, a tribe like the Muskogee Creek Nation of 80,000 people. That'd be difficult. So you define who you're going to assess out of that group. Okay, you've defined your community, and you've designed some appropriate survey techniques that'll work best for you, and also some questions that you think that would help measure the food sovereignty situation in your community. The way you've done that is you've been out talking with your tribal and community members about food sovereignty, introducing that concept to them, and letting them know that you will be conducting an assessment. And during this outreach work where you've been talking to your community, you've realized that many people are interested in exploring food sovereignty now that they've got an idea what that means, and they want to share their ideas. They've got concerns, they've got hopes for the future, and they're ready to talk to you about it. In fact, when you start the conversation, sometimes you'll find that you're going to be late to your next appointment because they just get excited. So after several months of this kind of outreach and planning, and probably some focus groups, that's what I mean by community meetings right there, and some staff meetings talking about how you're going to do this, probably a lot of staff meetings, here's what you've already accomplished. You've chosen some priority issues that you think you need to address, because you can't take everything on all at once. So you've chosen some priority issues, and there are ways to do that. There's systems to do that. Anyway, you've also designed some preliminary questions to find out what kind of useful information you can learn on these priority issues. You've also chosen some assessment tools that are appropriate for the people you're going to be working with. And that's something like, say you're going to be working with a lot of elders, you probably don't want to try to do an online survey. You want to do an appropriate technique that they will be able to be honest with you and to respond well. So maybe you want to do one-on-one interviews with the elders. You may even need a translator or somebody that could help them out. So that's part of it. Okay. And you've also done some training, because if you're going to do interviews, your staff and volunteers really need some help and guidance on how to do that. So you'll have a fairly uniform approach to each interview that you do, or each group session that you hold, or focus group, or talking circle. Give them a little bit of training on this so they're not uncomfortable, because you think you know what you're doing until you get in front of a group. That's just how it is. Okay, you've also created a timeline, and we went over that in the last one. There's a sample timeline for you. So you've gotten organized about how you're going to start doing this actual work and actually getting your assessment accomplished. And you've assigned tasks to specific people, and you've put it on a timeline so you can tell if you're keeping up, with what you need to do. Hopefully you've had time by now to do a practice session, because then you'll learn what questions just aren't working. And if you're going to do out loud discussion, you've practiced that a little bit, and you can adjust before you get out. Because once you start taking actual surveys, you don't want to change your presentation. You want to keep it the same for uniformity. Because even though these are not statistically perfect, random selected scientific assessments, you still want to be as fair as possible and not be changing things with each group, because you want your results to show some true pictures of what's going on. So you've had a practice session. You may have made some adjustments before you start doing actual assessments. And you've after all that, you've chosen the most appropriate approach, and you started publicizing your assessment meetings. So now you're ready to actually get out in the community, and you're going to start conducting your assessment, which is how we're going to explore food sovereignty. So we talked about this some as you were working up your questions, and here you're going to probably want to rethink some of them. So let's go over it again we just barely touched on it before. You have to use a concept that's known as backward planning takes thinking ahead. It's a little bit complex, but what you want to do is think ahead as far as desired results that you're hoping, because you've been talking about food sovereignty, probably heard some ideas thrown around. Staff probably has some ideas of programs that you could take. You think you know what's going on out in the community. So what are going to be some actual results that you hope to achieve through your food sovereignty work? Like, do you want to see the tribe start supporting community gardens? Would be a, throw some money into the communities for gardens. That would be a result that you want to look for, or that you hope to accomplish. So then this is the backward thinking part. You know what you want to do, but you need some evidence to support why you want to do that. So you determine what is acceptable evidence. Your evidence is going to be, or you could call it data or information. It's going to come from your survey question answers. It's going to come from things that are brought up. So how you choose your discussion topics is very important, because it's going to determine what topics come up during the discussion, dot survey results, etc. So this is your data. This is your evidence to support whatever you want to do to get your desired results. So once you've got the evidence, then you can start planning programs and projects, or possibly legislative policies, to address what you've learned through the actual evidence. So say you thought that it'd be a good idea for the tribe to do community gardens and start giving each community some money to do a community garden each year. Then you also put out questions on your survey, and it says, would you participate in a community garden if there were one in your community? And in one particular community, out of 35 people that showed up, only 2 people want to participate in the community garden. So under number 3, when you start planning experience, do you think you're going to want to plan a project for a community garden in that community? Probably not. So see how this backward thinking works. And this takes some practice, but once you've worked with it, you're going to get it, and you'll be able to do it. So we're going to talk about obstacles to food sovereignty. Can we go back one moment, please, Brian? One more, go back one more. Okay, so what is an obstacle to food sovereignty? They can come in many forms. And this is what you're learning through your conversations out there. And this is going to help you identify results and determine what you need to know and all that. So you want to look at obstacles to food sovereignty. They can be in many forms, but the common denominator is anything that's preventing your community from having control of the foods that are available, how the foods are produced and processed, and preventing access to nutritious and culturally appropriate foods. Those are obstacles to food sovereignty. Okay, next slide. So we're going to use this obstacle as an example, and we're going to talk about how you work with this doing something about this obstacle. So here's the obstacle. There's a loss of farming, hunting, fishing, gathering, and other traditional food knowledge skills. Do you find that your community or tribe is dependent on the dominant society for food production? And your food production and procurement skills, even traditional food seeds, are fast disappearing. Is this the case? Has your evidence shown you that this is a situation? Do you suspect, but you don't have the data to prove, that most of your community members are getting most of their family's food from fast food or discount grocery stores that are controlled by mega corporations? Again, that key word of sovereignty, control. So if they're buying at Walmart, who's controlling how everything's produced and how it's processed? You know, it's certainly not your tribe. So what kind of data would be useful for you to prove your theories true, that most of your people are getting their food from sources that are out of control of the tribe? And especially in this, under traditional food knowledge and skills, we don't want to see all of those knowledge and skills end up in a museum, as that picture on the right shows. That's an actual museum in the Southeast about Southeastern cultures, which of course most of them got removed, and this is really all people have left. It's just a museum display about the traditional foods of the Southeast. So we don't want to see that happening everywhere. We want to see the vibrant farm fields. We want to see the communities regaining control of the food system. So, okay, next slide, please. So now let's talk about how we collect the data, information, or evidence to address obstacles. We're going to use the same obstacle as an example. There are so many obstacles. We're just using this one. It may not emerge as the main thing in your community, so keep that in mind. We're just using this to show you how to walk through this process. Okay, so we're saying the loss of the traditional skills is going on. So your team, thinking about this obstacle, has designed and agreed upon several questions that will be helpful in gathering information about this particular issue. And here are some example questions that you can ask. Does anybody in your family hunt for food? Do you grow garden? You can just go on down the list until you get to the third from the last. They're all, you'll notice, yes and no answers. Like, do you know how to safely store garden and wild foods? Many people don't know how to store whatever they do find in the wild or grow themselves. So these are yes and no. They're the easiest ones, actually, to compile. The last three questions are what we would call open-ended questions. And these are where you are going to get responses from your community or tribal members. So here's some examples of open-ended questions. What could your tribal government do to make it easier for you to maintain traditional food access? What traditional food-related skill would you like to learn? What food skills would you be interested in learning more about? And sometimes you can provide a list and ask them to circle their choices. When you provide a list and ask them to circle their choices, it's no longer an open-ended question. You can always put other and hope that somebody's going to respond to other. But when you provide a list and you ask them to just circle their preferences, that's just a list where you can compile data from. It's no longer open-ended because you're not asking for their opinion. But so that one could go either way. Anyway, so there's some questions. So now we want to set the stage for getting these questions out there and getting nice, honest answers to them. So you've got your questions ready. You formatted them in a culturally appropriate way using assessment tools that are easily understood and can be completed in a reasonable amount of time. Don't forget that part, because you don't want to give them a big, long written survey because they're not going to, finish it, or either they'll get tired of it and just start putting whatever on there. So make sure everything can be done in a reasonable amount of time, and you're ready to go out and start actually conducting the assessment. So first of all, whether you're in a group, this is best in a group setting, but it can be in individual interviews. You want to make sure before you start asking any questions or doing anything with your assessment that the people you're talking to, whether it's a group, individual, or even a written situation, understand why you're gathering this information, how you plan to use it, and where and how it will be stored, as well as how you plan. I really should have made that another bullet, how you plan to provide feedback to the people who provide the information. So you want that information, all of this to be out there right up front so they understand what you're doing, why you want the information, how you're going to use it, where it's going to be kept, and that brings up confidentiality and security, you know, for people's responses, and how you plan to provide feedback to those who are giving you this valuable information. So if you're taking written or dot surveys, and this happens a lot at public events and locations like powwows or maybe in front of the WIC office or something like that, and you don't have the opportunity to discuss the purposes of the assessment and all this other information of how you plan to use it, where it's going to be stored, and how you'll provide feedback, then you need to prepare a written description of that stuff. You can have it on a little card. You can have a poster up, something that just explains all that so they see it. And the reason we're doing this is because we want nice, honest, and we want people to realize that honesty is important, and that we're asking them for help to design programs that will benefit them and everybody in the tribal community. So confidentiality, it's usually better, almost always better, not to ask people to provide their names. And it not only helps you get honest answers, but it also means that people have a little less of what I call test anxiety, which happens in all ages. That some of the elders hadn't filled out a written survey in a long time, and you see a bunch of questions and yes or no or multiple choice. Looks like a test. So if they're not putting their name on it, that's going to ease that. Plus, you don't really need their names most of the time. There may be certain times when you would. Also be aware that some people are not good at writing. They're not good at reading. That doesn't mean they don't have valuable things to share with you. It just means they're not good at reading and writing. Be aware of that and be ready with some really courteous way to take care of that. Always stress that there are no wrong answers. There are absolutely no right and wrong answers. You really need people to be honest so that your organization or your tribe can have reliable information to work with as they plan policies and design programs. Okay, next slide, please. So now we're in front of the group of people and you're ready to get started with a meeting, and you've told them, you know, those essential things of why you're doing the assessment and how you're going to use it and so forth. I want you to try this exercise with your group. This isn't good written. It don't work written. It's only for group settings. Now, I've used this very method, and I know other people have too, in all ages. You can make it last all day, or you can make it last just a few minutes, just as an introductory exercise. There are many ways to use this simple little exercise. So what you do, you ask everybody in the room to close their eyes. And when you ask, I learned this when I was a teacher, if you ask people to close their eyes, they get quiet. So I like to use this in the beginning of a session because it gets people's attention and it quiets them down, makes them start focusing. So you ask them to close their eyes and visualize the last meal that they ate and see all that food on the plate. Then while they're looking at it in their mind, you ask them if they know where any of that food came from. Most of the time in a group setting, unless you want this to last, you know, for hours or at least 1 hour, you won't ask them to say this out loud, these first two questions. You will just ask them to answer silently within themselves. Do you know where any of this food came from? Now, obviously, if you're doing this and you want it to last for, say, a full class period or something, then you'll ask them to open their eyes and you'll write down a bunch of stuff where the food came from, or if they know where the food came from. But just to make for the quick survey, the quick way of doing this, they just imagine, do they know where any of that food came from? Was any of that food produced in their community? Silently answer that. The third question is the important one. Could any of the food have been produced in your tribe or community? When they start answering this one in their mind, this is where the concepts of food sovereignty will begin to become personal and real. And so these answers should always be discussed out loud, at least for a few minutes. So you can just ask a few people, you know, just say, does anybody know where any of the food came from? And where, and once in a while they'll say, yeah, grandma made the jelly or something. But then you say, could that food have been produced in your community? give me some examples. If they're talking about breakfast, they could say, yeah, we could have produced the bacon because, you know, we can raise pigs. So why are we buying bacon at Walmart? You know, this is where it leads. So you can make this long or old or short, but this is a really valuable little exercise, and I hope you'll use it, and I hope it'll be successful for you. So that's your opening exercise. If you have time to do that, you'll be happy with it. Okay, next slide. So we're still setting the stage, and we want them to understand what is food sovereignty. So we're going to use another set of questions as an example. So these are yes and no, and they're really easy to compile as percentages. Well, actually, you know what? I messed up right here. We're not still setting the stage. We've actually got some information, so sorry about that. So we've got the information, and we're going to use this set of questions as an example. Oh, no, go back to that other slide, Brian. I'm sorry, I just messed up. That was my fault, my bad. Okay, so here are your questions, and let's say you've gotten answers to these. Here are the sample questions. Do you know where to get seeds for traditional crops? That was yes or no. And would you like to learn to save seeds? Yes or no. Now you've gotten your information and you've compiled it. So here, since these are easy to compile into data because it's just percentages, here's some ways you can use this data. You'll know it soon and you can start working with it. For program planning, let's say 20% of the people said they know where to get seeds for traditional crops. This reveals that there are 80% that don't know where to get the seeds. So maybe there's a need for traditional foods seeds. This may lead to garden projects to grow traditional seeds in addition to food. If 65% say they want to learn to save seeds, this tells you that 20% know where to get seeds, but 65% are interested. This provides you with a future program plan. You know that a seed saving class will be well attended if you're successful in letting the people you surveyed know that you're now providing this class as a service to your community or tribe. So you've used this data to figure out that, there's an interest out there. Then when you go into your grant writing efforts, you use the same percentages to justify the need for your proposed traditional foods growing and seed saving project. So you're able to support your proposal with real data. And you tell your funder in your proposal that you conducted a food sovereignty assessment. Tell them when it was done so they know it's recent and who you surveyed. Also, if you're the tribal government or if you're working with the tribal government in some way, use the very same percentages to present ideas for legislative action that might request policies or financial assistance to facilitate production of traditional foods and preservation of these essential seeds for future generations. So from the information you got from these two simple yes and no questions, you can do program planning, you can support your grant writing efforts, and the funders really like it when they see that real data that's you've gone to the trouble to talk to your community before you planned the program and you found out what they wanted. So they love to see that stuff. And also in a governmental setting, you have some information for policy development. So let's go to the next slide, please. Now, let's say it was an open-ended question, and we'll use the same one that we had talked about earlier. What could your tribal government or local government do to make it easier for you to maintain traditional food access? So you may have gotten a lot of responses. So while this may seem like a simple question, it's really a rather complex issue. It requires that the respondents or the people you're talking to do some deep thinking to come up with ideas. Perhaps this topic has been a recurring theme in your initial research and your outreach activities when you were designing the assessment. So that's why you decided to put it in your questions, was people kept saying, well, why can't the government do something about this? Why can't the tribe do something? So you've made a question out of it, and it emerged as one of your priority issues as you were doing your outreach work. So now you're actually giving your community respondents an opportunity to give voice to their ideas, and they appreciate this. This will help your work so much. Be prepared to get many different answers to this type of question. And some people will leave it blank because either they don't have an idea, or they're not good at writing, they're not good at expressing themselves, or for some reason they don't think you really care about their opinion. So don't be surprised because people leave these open-ended questions blank. So we go through the same 3 uses of the answers. For program planning, say there's a really strong response to this and other policy related questions as you've been out doing these assessments. And many ideas were generated from this one open-ended question. You got a lot of ideas. So maybe as a nonprofit organization, you should consider adding policy work to your programs, maybe even adding a staff position for policy development. If this is emerging as important in your community, then your response as an organization would be to start making a response available to them. A grant writing, again, if the response is strong, add policy development with accompanying staff to as many grant proposals as you possibly can. Search for policy funders, they're out there. So this is through policy development, it's a good way to fund some of your staff time, because you know staff time's hard to fund. So you could either assign one of your people who's working in an area that's not getting all that much community response and have them spend half of their time or a good portion of their time on policy. You can create a new position, and there's going to have to be research done. There's going to have to be follow-up surveying and assessments, communications with the government officials, and all of these things are time consuming. So you can build in a lot of staff time into your grant proposals if you're going to start working on policy. Also, in addition to using the data to justify needs and policy grant proposals, you can use these responses as conversation starters with your elected officials. Just get them talking about it. Also as suggestions for political platforms. And what I mean by that is when it comes election time rolls around, then have people bring this up at the political meetings and say, what are you going to do about our food sovereignty? You know, what are you going to do about our tribe controlling their own food? Bring it up. Make them, maybe you'll even get it on somebody's platform. You never know. Also, you might want to, if it's emerged as something that with a lot of response, you want to initiate discussions of forming a tribal or a local food policy council. Sometimes the local food people and the tribal food people combine into a food policy council, which is just a body that discusses food issues and works on them in a legislative way. So you can use all these answers as evidence of a need for your tribal or your local government, or maybe both, to start funding to support food sovereignty policy work. So just one little question can give you so much to work with. Hope these examples made it a little more clear to you. Okay, next slide. So again, in using your responses, I just wanted to show you a visual. This is easiest with your percentage, your yes and no answers is you just, of course, they're the easiest to analyze, as we've said several times. You count the number of yes and no and figure out what percentage that is of the total number. So it's pretty easy, even I can do it. And then anybody that's good with Excel or numbers is able to generate visuals to show these results. So this is a bar graph. They also make pie graphs. They're all really easy, but anybody knows what they're doing. And it just makes it very obvious what's going on. So for this one, it was a yes and no question. Does your family grow a garden? It was asking 8 different schools of a certain age group of kids. And then all the responses were calculated like this. And it shows you, you know, where the most gardens are. You can compare this answer to maybe you had another one that says, would your family grow a garden if it were tilled? And maybe, you know, 90% said they would, but what the obstacle is that they don't have a tiller, or they don't have anybody able to till their land, even if they had a tiller or their garden plot. So if you had that question and you got a whole bunch of people saying yes, then what does that tell you? That means that, especially in these communities where if they're not growing a garden, and there are a lot of them that want to, then there's a good place to start a tilling service and help these folks start a garden, which is going to help them control their family's food. So it's building food sovereignty. You see how all these things finally work together. So let's go to the next slide, please. Another thing you can use that's really simple and makes it easy to compile is what I call preference lists. And this is where you just use a sheet of paper and you give them a bunch of choices. So in this example, we're talking about activities that people would like to see your organization or your food program within the tribe do to improve your food sovereignty situation. So you just list a whole bunch of future activities that your food team thinks might be well received or needed in your tribe or community. So your tribe creates a list, or your team creates a list, and each person that you're surveying will simply circle the activities they are interested in. Then, of course, you just count them up and you see what percentage each response had of the total number of surveys. So these can also be shown on bar graphs and pie charts and things. That makes it real easy. So for what this list that I'm showing you here is actual results from Muskogee Food Sovereignty Survey quite a few years ago. Was not all that many, but anyway, this was actual results from a list of activities compiled by the staff and the food sovereignty team that included a bunch of tribal employees like diabetes and elderly nutrition and WIC and people involved with the food system. All came together, think up a bunch of ideas of activities, and then listed them all in no particular order whatsoever, then ask people to just circle which ones they personally would be interested in. And this is how it came out, which some of these were surprises to the staff because they really thought there'd be a lot more interest in, for instance, low cost and free seeds. And they thought there'd be interest in organic gardening classes. What that told the staff at the time was that people might not even know what organic means because it's not used all the time, but all the traditional agriculture was organic because it far predated agricultural chemicals. So, you know, maybe shows you there's a need for education right there. But this is a simple way to compile a lot of information. It gives you some solid data to work with in your program planning, especially. So obviously the responses provide you with a clear picture of what your tribal members are interested in seeing your organization or your tribal program doing for them. When you plan programs according to your community's wishes, participation in those programs will be positive and active. If they've had a hand in designing it, and they know they have, because you told them that's what you're going to use the survey results for, then when you actually offer the program that they were interested in, don't you think they're going to be more interested than if you just cooked up something and said, here you go, and there wasn't any community participation at all? So funders know this. Funders know that if there's participation in the planning my words are going away from me today, planning process, that then they're more likely to participate once the activities are initiated. So when you're writing your grants, be sure and show any kind of data that you use, because it shows that your community or tribal members were involved in program planning and that they do have interest in the topics that you're proposing to carry out and that you're asking for money to assist you with to carry out. Funders like to know that their money's being well spent. So if they know the community's asking for this and you're making plans to provide it, chances are your funder's going to look pretty favorably at your proposal. It's going to set you apart. Also in policy development, tribal officials, if they're elected, they need to know what their constituents are interested in. So that gives you, I mean, that's pretty obvious. Now they also will know the directions that the community or the tribe would like for them to take in addressing food sovereignty. So these preference lists, while simple, easy to do, easy to compile, they give you a lot of valuable information. Okay, next slide, please. So now you've done your assessment. Yay, you've done it. You've been out there, you've been in the communities, you've gotten all kinds of data, you've compiled it, and it's great information. What's going to be your best way to use it, other than these specific things that we used examples for, that you're going to use it for grant writing, program planning, and policy development, most likely. Or if not, then at least looking at policies. So this is a more general look that you're going to take at the information. This is more of your food team needs to get together and do this, and then possibly involve more of your staff or just people you think would be important or have been interested in it. You might even get some of the community leaders that showed a particular interest in the assessment to get in on this conversation. And what you want to do is take a really serious look at what people have told you, not item by item, not specific, like, okay, we'd like to have farmers market, 75% want a farmers market. What are we going to do to make a farmers market? This is more general. What was the general feeling you got out there? Think really seriously about the opinions. How many people responded? Were they just bored with this whole idea, or did this seem to excite them? Did it seem to get their interest? Are they talking about food sovereignty all of a sudden? Are they talking about traditional foods? Do they have opinions on this? If people have opinions, then they've given it some thought. And, they think seriously about the ideas you've heard. Don't just be stuck in what your staff has figured out you think you need to do. When you're taking this assessment to learn from your community, you may learn some things you didn't expect, and they may not fit your plans. You may have done a big strategic plan for the next 5 years, 1, 3, and 5-year plan, and maybe a big part of that was having the community gardens, and then you found out nobody wants to do a community garden, or there's not enough willing to help to make it successful. So you're going to have to change your plans. So that's what I mean by thinking seriously about it and take it seriously. And so you want to think about their opinions, ideas, concerns, and suggestions, and everything else they've shared with you, all the data, revealing their interest and their knowledge about your local food system. You might find that there's some knowledge out there you didn't know about, or there might be a huge lack of knowledge. So start looking for trends in the information, generalities. Discuss among yourselves what information has surprised you and how you may adjust your organizational plans to reflect what you've learned. And just remember, this is why you reached out to your community or your tribal members in the first place, was to learn from them. So take it seriously, use it, and spend some time thinking about and discussing what you've learned. And also, I didn't put this on the slide, but don't forget the feedback. So let all the communities, or however you've taken it, if you went to the powwow and it was a public setting, then make a public announcement in the newspaper or on the radio or wherever you have to do it, of how people can learn the results. Or, get it out in the tribal paper, just however you've done it. If you've gone community to community, you can go back to each community and give them the responses. And you can write that time and travel expense into your grant proposals, because providing feedback is very important. So don't forget that part. After you've thought it all through, and you go back and you tell them what you've learned and you thank them for their participation. Okay, so next slide, please. So here's some trends to watch for as you're doing this step of examining what all you've learned and looking at what's emerged. So look at what were the most repeated responses. regarding those priority issues that you had identified and asked about. What was repeated? Pay attention to that. What new or unanticipated information did you learn? What information does your team feel is going to be the most helpful as you develop your programs and your grant proposals to support those programs? What have your community and tribal members identified as the projects or activities they'll be most likely to participate in if your organization offers them? And what responses are particular to your cultural context? So you know, there may be some things going on with your food that's going to be different from anywhere else. So how are you going to respond to that? Because you can't just look at other examples. So there may be some things that need some special cultural consideration. And also, are there any issues and responses that could be the basis of proposals where you can approach your tribe or your local government with possible legislative action, you know, with ideas for that? So just think about all these things and look for these trends as you're thinking about it. Next slide, please. And let's look at a few obstacles that might have emerged, because that's going to probably be what you're going to see the most repeated is obstacles to food sovereignty. So let's look at some of the issues that emerged and some of possible responses you could encourage from your tribe or your organization. So say there's lack of access to healthy, locally produced foods. Traditional knowledge is disappearing. Healthy, fresh foods are too expensive, especially organic produce. Or maybe there's not even a good source in your area because you're way out in the country and you're far from a Whole Foods, which would be expensive anyway. Or your tribe or local government does not offer local foods in the food service programs. And, you know, I'm showing that by a school lunch. So let's say on that last one, your tribe doesn't offer any local foods or food service programs. You could use just that one. If that response was repeated a lot of times as an obstacle or something that's bothering people, then that's something on people's minds. That's a need in the community. It could be a basis for starting a farm to school program, or maybe working with your elderly nutrition to get some fresh grown foods on the menu there, or traditional foods added to the menu. So that would be an example. Lack of access to healthy, locally produced foods. Maybe it's time to start a farmer's market. People don't know about food knowledge, traditional food knowledge. Start doing some classes or hold events that have cultural foods, have seed saving classes. A really good step, if you haven't access problems to local organic food, is try to identify organic growers in your community. You'd probably be surprised how many there are, and they're usually small farms, small family farms, and usually they would like to find some new customers. So maybe they'll help teach some classes. You can get grant money, pay the organic farmers, teach your community members how to successfully grow organic, successful family or community gardens. And then you may want to develop some youth and elder programs, because the elders often know how to grow the stuff. They just don't have anybody to help them. So if they have some youth paired up with them, you can get that intergenerational exchange going on. So that just gives you some ideas, again, following up on your information and how you might be able to use it. Next slide, please. If it's developing an action plan for legislative work, here's an example. There are two examples. You can find this Dene Food Sovereignty Assessment Report on the First Nations Development Institute website. So if you just Google First Nations Development and you get into their website, look for the Knowledge Center. When you get into the Knowledge Center, you sign in one time. It's free. It's just they just have you sign in to track how many people are using it. So you sign in, and then there's a whole lot of good information on there about food sovereignty assessments, examples, and policy development. So the Dene Food Sovereignty assessment was done several years ago. It's a wonderful document. You get all kinds of good information, and it's a good example to use in your community. The other one that's in the square box there is the actual action plan developed by Muskogee Food Sovereignty Initiative in 2008, and it was compiled from the results of a food sovereignty assessment in 17 communities. So just the opening paragraph tells you a lot. So many, and this was designed to give to the tribal, the politicians, the national council members, and the other leaders within the tribe who have the power to maybe do something. So this was a statement delivered to them. The many community leaders, national council representatives, and community members expressed that they would devote time to improving the food system and preserving traditional knowledge. They expressed difficulty in being able to get transportation to programs in Okmulgee, which is the capital of the Creek Nation. So that was something that surprised the team. They hadn't thought about transportation as being an obstacle, and it emerged as one. They were also willing to share resources in most communities, especially in the southern rural ones. So that tells the team that in the southern part of the Muskogee Creek Nation, they're very interested and they want to help each other. They want to do something. Also, many citizens have land that's not being used that they would like to see food grown on. So then there were some concrete steps that were actually suggested. This is just an example of an action plan, or it could be a proposal for legislative action. So you want to summarize everything as concisely as possible and point out the main things that emerged through your assessment. Try to present it in one page or less so that they don't have to spend a lot of time, but so they'll just see it and they'll get it. All right, next page, next slide, please. And so finally, as a final step, don't forget to evaluate yourselves and evaluate the success of your assessment. If you've gotten grant money to do your assessment, you're probably required to evaluate yourselves. But here's some things to consider as you're, looking at how it went and looking at future assessments. So, because you're not going to just do one and be done. If you're doing food sovereignty work, you're going to keep, things will change, hopefully for the better. And you'll want to keep assessing it to see the progress. So here's some things to ask about the one you just completed. Do you feel that the responses were honest and candid? Did your presentation make methods let people be comfortable and encourage participation? Did the questions that you chose produce useful information for your organization for planning? What things would you change next time? And is there information you wish you had included, as well as which things work best? So you're looking at doing future ones, you're evaluating yourselves on how well you did this time, and if you need to make some changes. So now you're ready. You're ready to move forward using the information that's current and it's generated from your own tribal and community members. So I wish all of you good luck. I know you're young and you're just getting started, and this is a lot of information and it's going to be hard to remember all of it. So download those PDFs. And if you ever get interested in doing a food sovereignty assessment, I'm always available to you. Just fire off an email to me. I'll be happy to respond. I'm not going to charge you just for responding to you. So please do these assessments. They're just one of the most useful things you can do. They're going to make your food work successful. They're going to help you get funding to do your work. They're going to successfully engage your community in your work, and you may even influence your government to make policy changes. So good luck to everyone. We have a little time for questions and answers, and thank you for attending these webinars. So it's back to you, Brian or Aaron.
Thank you, Vicki. As Vicki just mentioned, now is going to be a good time to submit any questions that you might have. You can use the questions feature that's in your control panel, and it works just like sending a text message. You just type in your question into the field and send it to me, and I'll read it out loud, and Vicki and Aaron will take a shot at answering it. So while you guys are thinking about a question that you might have for our presenters, I'll go ahead and read a question that came through during the presentation. The question is If you're not surveying particular schools or classes where you would know ages of those surveyed, how do you track demographics or groups of individuals of various ages, incomes, etc.? What demographics are important to collect?
Okay, that's a good question, and I didn't cover that. So remember I said it's usually a good idea to have no names on the surveys. This is a real good example of why it's a good idea. So if they're not putting names on there, again, your food team would want to make the decisions. You don't want to think this is some sensitive stuff. So you don't want to just be one person making this decision. But get together with your food team, decide which demographic information you need to know, and go ahead and ask it. You can just have a part on there that says, you know, age, which community. Sometimes you might want to ask which community, sometimes you may not. That's going to depend on your situation. You can have tribal member, yes or no. You can have income levels, you know, it's sensitive, but they're not putting their name on there. And some funders really want to know income levels. A lot of funding is aimed at what they call, you know, they've defined as low income. So you're going to have to prove that the people you surveyed were giving you responses appropriate for low income people if you're asking for low income funding. So you can go ahead and just put some ranges of income levels. We did this at Muskogee Creek Nation when I was working over there. Nobody had a problem with it. You just tell them if there's any questions that make them uncomfortable, they don't have to answer them. But go ahead and put those questions on there. You could just have, you know, your income level. You could say family income of X and below, family income of X to X. It doesn't have to be real specific, but what you're aiming at probably is whether people are below the poverty level or not. You could also ask if they receive free or reduced meals at school. A lot of funders go by that. Many of our Native communities, that the schools are 100% free and reduced meals. So you can use that data to show that you're working in a low income community. But, you know, you decide which data is important to you, and just get it. Just ask for it, and make them comfortable with not answering.
All right, thank you, Vicki. So what I heard from your response was that that's something that should probably come out of the food sovereignty team that they put together, is determining not only what the survey questions are going to be, but what some of the demographics that you'll collect will be.
Yeah, there'll be survey questions where you get the demographic information, and I wouldn't want to be the one person deciding that. That's why I say make it the team. You know, it's something that takes some real consideration.
All righty. So one last call for questions. I do want to take a moment to thank our fellows who joined the webinar today. And I'll also point out that we have a couple of fellows in attendance, or I should say future fellows in attendance, who have not yet started their service yet. So I do appreciate you guys taking the time to join the webinar as well. So I'll give you one more minute to send a question in, and I'll just remind you that Vicki, tell us how many years have you been working on food sovereignty assessments?
About, well, at least 12.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
the whole idea of food sovereignty assessments hasn't been around a real long time.
So, well, I asked the question just to, let our fellows know that, you do have a lot of experience and information to share that you may not have included in your presentation. So I really want to encourage them to submit a question now, because it'd be a good time to do it while you're on the webinar. We did have a comment that came through, and the person that asked the question previously said, "Great answer, thank you."
Oh, okay. Well, honestly, I've learned a lot through my work with First Nations Development Institute and Indigenous Food and Agriculture and just others around the country. there are people doing these assessments in a lot of different tribal settings, and I learn all the time from them. It's a continuing process. So it's evolving. My information base changes all the time, and so will yours as you do this work. So it's something that's exciting. Changes all the time. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you just from the early work that we're doing on this program as a whole, we're seeing really a really wide variety of kind of situations and unique needs at each one of our sites. So
Mm-hmm.
having you kind of share your experience with our fellows is really valuable.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to do it.
All right, I have another question that has come through. How many surveys do you conduct to make the numbers valid?
Well, again, that's going to vary. So if you're working in a community that's very rural and there aren't all that many people out there, you know, you're not going to have hundreds and hundreds of surveys. So it's really a matter, again, for your food team to discuss and have a goal of, what would be our goal of answers that we feel will represent our community. So that, again, it's going to vary from one place to the next. If you're in a large tribal setting, like when Danae did theirs, that tribe's got over 100,000 members, and they're spread out over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles. You couldn't possibly do it with. I think they chose just one community to work in. So just figure out what's representative for your area and for the kind of work that you're doing. Then sometimes people will just pick one, like a county to work with, and then replicate the same methods in the other counties that would be within the tribal jurisdictional boundary. So there are a lot of ways to do it, but figure out what's going to give you the best representation for your situation. Sorry, I can't just answer that for you, but there's not a bad answer.
All right, thank you, Vicki. So I don't see any other questions coming through, so we'll go ahead and close out today's webinar. Erin, are you still on the call? Do you have any final words before we sign off today?
I just wanted to thank everybody again for taking the time out of their day to attend these webinars, and I hope that they've been useful. Just like Vicki said, y'all can reach out to any of the three of us at any time, and we'll be happy to help you even after these webinars have concluded. So if there was a question you had that you didn't think of till later, or you didn't feel comfortable asking it here, please don't be shy later and reach out to one of us. We're happy to help. And thanks again for joining us.
All right, thank you, Erin. Vicki, did you have any final thoughts before we sign off?
Just, I'm glad everybody's thinking about doing assessments, and I hope you follow through and do it. And just feel free to contact me. I'm happy to help you out. I know it's a lot of information very quickly presented, so it's hard to digest it. So thank you so much, and the best of luck with your food sovereignty work.
All right, and I will piggyback those sentiments and thank our attendees for joining us today. This webinar has been recorded, and we will be posting it to our Native Food Sovereignty Fellows webpage, which you guys have already visited to see some of our previous trainings. I'll also remind you that our next training webinar will be on July 30th, and that's going to be a survey of a variety of different food projects that are happening across Indian country. So that should be a really interesting one, and Erin will be leading that presentation. So thank you again for your time. Everyone on this webinar has my contact information, so please do not hesitate to contact me if you have any questions about this presentation, past presentations, or any presentations that we've got planned in the future. I hope everyone has a good day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.